Hello and welcome to our first mini lecture of Chapter 1 for 231. We're at the very beginning. So hopefully you have watched the welcome video that I posted and put in the Welcome Start Here folder on the 231 Blackboard page that has a lot of good information for just orienting yourself to the Blackboard page where your assignments are, where you go to find information, these lectures, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you watch that welcome video. And then we are also planning on doing the in-person labs, which are scheduled for Mondays. So in addition to this way of trying to connect with you guys, we will actually get to see each other in real life, which will be a nice change from the last couple of terms, as far as it is safe and the state allows us to do that. So this is going to be an interesting term. I don't know how it's going to progress. Hopefully everything will stay the same, but just be aware that if there are changes, I try to communicate to my students the best I can to keep you up to speed on any changes that might have to occur as we progress through this term. All right. So Chapter 1 is an introduction to anatomy and physiology, and I'm breaking my lectures down into kind of topics. You have access to all of the PowerPoints, the full PowerPoints. I break them up into different sections, so you don't have to sit and watch like an hour and a half video. You can watch just the short little sections depending on where you are reading and studying, and you can always go back and review if you need to. So this particular mini lesson, this first one, is going to be the organization of the body and going over some body systems and just a short little historical look at kind of how the study of anatomy and physiology has changed over the years. So if you take a look, these are some of the earliest drawings of human anatomy. If you can see, starting with the medieval anatomy, it's very basic. This would be like in the 12, 13, 1400s. And really it's just bones. They don't really have any other information. And mostly that's because they didn't really do dissections. It was kind of a taboo to cut open a human body. And so they could figure out what things were based on feeling and palpating the different body parts. They could feel there's all the individual vertebrae. They could feel the bones in the hand. They could feel the collarbone, and there was like the shoulder, and you had your arms and your wrists. So those were kind of their best understanding of what was going on. As the centuries progressed, we have some pictures of Leonardo da Vinci, who was a great artist as well as an anatomist. So he was able to see inside the body a little bit more so. And then Andreas Vesalius in 1543 was kind of the grandfather or the father of our understanding of the human body. So dissections were getting a little bit more acceptable in society instead of just trying to learn everything from other animals. So then fast forward to some of the technologies that we have today to get a better understanding of what things are looking like inside of the body. We have new imaging tools like MRIs and X-rays. We have microscopes to see things at the cellular level. And we have specialized processes of cadaver dissection or display, like if any of you have had the opportunity of going to one of those human bodies exhibits, highly recommended. But we are getting more and more knowledgeable about the human body without having to have a dead cadaver to understand that information. All right, so the course you are taking is called Anatomy and Physiology. So what we just kind of went through was the anatomy piece. So the anatomy is basically the parts and pieces. So you're going to be learning what things are called, what they look like, all the different structures associated with each body part or each region. The second half of the course is called Physiology. So physiology is how stuff works. So in addition to learning the names and identification of things, you're going to be learning how to understand and apply the functionality of these things. You can say structure and function, which was a main theme that you learned back in your general bio class, anatomy, physiology. It's just structure and function applied to body systems. So the examples that I've shown here are this little animation of muscle physiology. This is at the molecular level. inside of your muscle cells. So we're going to be learning about that in chapter 10. DNA replication, you may remember learning about that in Bi 211 or your general bio class. So the parts of DNA, right, your sugar phosphate backbone, the A, T, C, and G bases, the phosphodiester bonds, the hydrogen bonds, that would be the anatomy of DNA, and then the physiology is what does it do? So we know that DNA has to copy itself during the processes of mitosis and meiosis. We could also, if I want to put in there, transcription, so the copying of DNA into an RNA product or transcript. So those would be the physiological aspects of the structure of DNA. And then the bottom example is the heart. So there's a lot of parts and pieces to heart anatomy, but how does the heart work? So it's contracting, it's generating pressure, it's pumping blood, it's receiving blood. So that would be the physiology of the heart itself. So as we progress through this term, you want to make sure you're keeping that in mind, that you typically are going to be learning the anatomy first. You have to know what the parts and pieces are before you can start applying what they do. But the big picture is we're trying to get a good grasp of both of those concepts, the anatomy and the physiology. All right, so this, we're going to go through the levels of structural organization, and it kind of sets the stage basically for the rest of this whole year for all of your A and P sequences. So you may have seen this back in your general bio class. I know we covered them by 211 here at RCC, but all things, all organic things start with atoms and chemicals. So if you remember atoms, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, HONC, or hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, if you want to do it in that order. Those are the four atoms that make up like 90-something% of all organic matter. So we have some other things in there like sulfur and phosphorus and some ions like sodium and potassium, but the basic level of organization is atomic, or what we call chemical. So in this class, we are skipping chapter 2 because that's just an overview of chemistry. So if you want to review some of those chemical ideas like covalent bonds, ionic bonds, pH, I don't know what's really in that chapter since we never cover it, but it's just a quick review of chapter 2 stuff. So I'm not going to be covering it. I'm not going to be testing on it. It's a good resource if it's been a while since you've had your basic chemistry or your general biology. So as these atoms and chemicals come together, they make these larger macromolecules. So again, if you remember, the major organic macromolecules, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. So those four major organic molecules then combine together into the next level of organization, which is cellular. So in our text, this is covered, kind of the basic cell biology is covered in chapter 3. Again, I'm not going to be covering this. This was your prerequisite of your general bio course that you had to take to get into this class. So chapters 2 and 3 are there for review only. If you forget what a Golgi body is or the structure of the plasma membrane, go back and review chapter 3. If you don't know what an ionic bond is or diffusion, you can go back to chapter 2 or 3. I don't know where. Those chapters are your review chapters. What we're going to start picking up next week after this introduction week is going to be the next level of organization where you have similar types of cells combining together to produce a tissue. So we're going to pick up after we skip over chapters 2 and 3 with chapter 4, which is called histology, the study of tissues. So here we're following a cardiac muscle cell. And a whole bunch of cardiac muscle cells coming together is called a tissue. So this is called cardiac muscle tissue. And there's four major types of tissues. You'll see epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So this is focusing on just one type of the muscle tissue called cardiac muscle tissue. So then if you get a couple tissues coming together and you combine those together into a special structure that has a particular function, this is what we call the organ. So an organ, the organ level is multiple tissue types coming together to make an organ. Now, if we talk about what could be some tissue types found in the heart, well, we just listed one. We have cardiac muscle. Okay, so here's a picture of the heart. Can we think of any other of those tissues? I know I just mentioned them. So we had epithelium, connective. That looks like that was supposed to be some ends. Still getting used to this online stuff. Connective tissue. We have nervous tissue, and we have muscle tissue. So those are our four main groups of tissues. So we know that the heart clearly contains muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue. Do you think it contains nervous tissue? Well, yeah, it's got some nervous tissue that allows for the heartbeat to be propagated through all of your muscle, the cardiac muscle tissue. So we've checked that box. So two or more tissues coming together can make an organ. So we've checked the boxes to be able to make the heart be an organ, but are we done? Do you think there's connective tissue associated with the heart? Well, if you look at that yellow stuff right here, this is called adipose tissue. Do you know what adipose tissue is? Adipose tissue is fat. It's a fat, it's padding. And so yes, we do have connective tissue also in the heart. And then lastly, do you think we have epithelial tissue? So epithelial tissue usually is like your skin. Epidermis is made up of multiple types of epithelial tissue. Linings of things, so like in your mouth and your digestive tract and your respiratory tract, inside the lining of your stomach. Do you think we might have epithelial tissue inside of our heart? What do you think? We do. It's actually called endothelium. It is the connective tissue that lines the inside of your heart and those major vessels. So the heart itself is comprised of with examples of all of the four different categories of tissues, which is a great example for identifying an organ. Okay, so now we've got the heart. Now we got to, the heart doesn't work just isolated all by itself. It has other things that it works with. And when we hook those together, it creates what's called the cardiovascular system. So the heart organ works together with the blood vessel organs to create the cardiovascular system. And it's got blood traveling through it, which is a type of a connective tissue. So this is our organ system. So the way that our text and lab courses are organized, talking about class organization within structural organization, is basically each chapter usually represents one body system. Sometimes it takes a couple chapters. So for example, our first body system we're going to get to is the integumentary system, which is your skin and hair and fingernails. Then we're going to move on to the skeletal system, and then the muscular system, and then the nervous system. And then that's going to take us through the end of this term. And then in 232, we'll pick up finishing the nervous system, right? We can kind of see it here. My picture's kind of blocked out. And then we'll go to the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, respiratory. Oh, this is kind of 233 stuff, 232 stuff. And then we finish up digestive, urinary, and reproductive. And you put all of those together, we kind of make a little, this is 231 stuff, just so you can kind of get a preview of what you're jumping into with going into this A&P series. So when you put all of those together, you get an organism. So from atoms and chemicals to cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organism, this is the holistic view of looking at the human body. Now, this could be true for an elephant or a cat or an insect, but this is human anatomy and physiology, so that's what we're going to focus on. So we have some introductory stuff. And tissues. I'll put this over here. This introductory stuff, tissues, and then integumentary, skeletal, muscular, and the beginning of nervous system for 231. We finish nervous system, endocrine, and cardiovascular in 232, and lymphatic on to reproductive for 233. All right, so that's levels of structural organization and kind of a big outline of where we're going to be covering these topics in this year-long set of 3 courses. Okay, and then here's just a close kind of a little mini overview of the organ systems that we just talked about there in that organization slide. So I'm not going to go through each organ and each function for this. You can clearly look at pictures and read through things on your own. But I will tell you what my expectation is for your knowledge for these things. So first, you do need to know your 11 body systems. So integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary. Oops, I missed one. I think I added one more. Urinary and reproductive. And there's 2 types of reproductive, male and female, but we just count that as one body system. So you do need to know the individual organ systems, kind of know their names clearly, and then you need to know the major organs and the major functions for each body system. So I should be able to ask you either to give me list organs and functions if I were to ask you for a particular system, or if I were to list for you organs or functions, you should be able to identify the body system that matches that. So for example, if I said, which of the following body systems contains the stomach, small intestine, large intestine functions to absorb and conserve water, that would be your clues that I'm asking about the digestive system. Or if I say, list 3 organs and functions associated with the respiratory system, then you could, list any 3 from those, the bullet points here. We have this representation here in the textbook. Your lab manual also has another representation that you'll be seeing on the first lab day on the first Monday when you work on the rat dissection activity. So if you're watching this early, you will be doing a rat dissection. If you're watching this later in the week, wasn't that a cool rat dissection, right? Okay. All right. And then lastly, just to finish up, talking about interrelationships between systems, and these are just pictures from the internet. They're not from your text or lab manual, but I felt they were pretty good in kind of showing this relationship that I want you guys to keep in mind, because when we are covering systems, we get really in depth in each system. So integumentary system, we're learning integumentary, but you have to remember the integumentary system does not stand alone. It is integral with multiple other systems. Or when we get to the respiratory system, there's a lot of detail, anatomy and physiology in the respiratory system, but don't forget that the respiratory system is very closely interrelated with your circulatory system and your digestive system and your nervous system. So just know that your body cannot, you can't pull one system out and just have it be sitting all by itself. We study it that way just for we don't want to get overwhelmed by studying everything all at once. So we got to do bit by bit, but just keep in mind that when we learn at each system, it is part of that whole organism. All right, so that wraps up our first lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be posting these. They're going to be found in each week's lecture materials folder. Maybe 4 to 5, 3, depending on how big the chapter is, little mini lectures for each chapter that will be following the PowerPoints and the lecture note outlines that you have also available on Blackboard. All right, I will see you next time. Bye.